at this 10 a.m. showing. I'm sure people will be dropping in as we continue as well, and that's totally fine. My name is Johanna Koljonen. I'm a media analyst. I work with many things, but also with something called the Nostradamus Project for the Göteborg Film Festival. We predict the future. We have found that people find it a little bit difficult to remember the name of our project, so I have a little mnemonic for you, because sometimes people in the film industry get confused. They call it the Nosferatu Project. No, there are bloodsuckers in this industry, but that is not our main focus. It's also not the Nostromo Project, which is also a very depressing story with the spaceship in Aliens, of course, as I'm sure you remember. We are referencing Nostradamus, who was a 16th century occultist, basically, who predicted the future, or at least claimed to. He was very vague, so all of his predictions have come true, because if you wait long enough, something that looks like the thing you said has happened. We have set ourselves a slightly more difficult task. We say that we're telling or describing what's going to happen 3 to 5 years from wherever we're at. And the way we can do that is that we're not actually doing it with occult methods. We're cheating. We're speaking to people in strategic positions in the industry. We're going to a lot of seminars like this and listening very carefully. And we're listening a lot in bars at film festivals. And by speaking to people about what they are deciding today and what they are working on today, as you understand, of course, all about the time cycles in the industry, it means that the things that the people at the front edges are working on today will be reality 3 to 5 years from now. And this is our 5th year, our 5th report, and I've gone back and looked, and we have been right about almost everything except the holdback times, which we thought we would have a solution on 5 years ago. And we're not very close to a solution still, but there it is. Otherwise, it's valuable to go back and look at our previous reports, which are all available free for download online. A very small amount of paper copies is also produced each year, and I have a few of them right here, so if while I'm talking, if you need to leave, or if you realize that you want one, you can come and grab them while they last. Of course, this work would not be possible without our sponsors, the main of which are Göteborg Film Festival, which we're part of, and Lindholmen Science Park. And there are also other funders like Västra Götalandsregionen, City of Gothenburg, the Creative Europe program, and Nordisk TV Fund. We give an annual seminar at the Göteborg Festival during the Nordic Film Market every year, and if you haven't been to the Nordic Film Market, I warmly recommend it. It's a massive show and a good experience as well. Yes. So, today I'm going to talk about what the experts in this year's report are worried about. And unfortunately, they are more worried than optimistic. But I do promise that I will land in some kind of hope and some kind of practical advice. I'm going to speak for the first hour, and then we're going to have a panel about blockchain and practical consequences or practical uses in the value chain for blockchain technology in the second hour of this session, with a very short break in between. So let's begin. This is a still from a film called The 10-Meter Tower. It's a Swedish short from 2016. It's a short documentary about people trying to jump from the 10-meter tower. This is a very powerful film, because it's so incredibly human and so physical, and you're really suffering with these people and their decision process, and some of them jump and some of them climb down the stairs again. Jumping into the unknown, even when you know it's safe, is terrifying. This film did pretty well for itself on the traditional short documentary circuit, which is festivals mainly, as you know. Later, it became a viral sensation when it was picked for the Opdoc series, curated by the New York Times on their webpage. So this film, of course I'm using it metaphorically, but also in a practical sense, this film is a very practical example of how everything about film distribution and circulation is changing. And yes, metaphorically, it's also an illustration of the core finding of this year's report. Klaus Ladegaard is the recently appointed CEO of the Danish Film Institute, and in our interview with him, he verbalized very succinctly something that most of the interviewees were referring to in one way or another. He says, of the film industry specifically, he says, somehow it really thrills me that we can win or we can fail. We can lose it all within the next 2, 4, 6 years. But I also think we can win and emerge as a film industry better and with more impact. So I would like us to take a moment to think about what that means. When some very serious, very, very smart people, and this is a smart guy, when they're very worried about the film industry losing it all, what are we talking about? And when we're here, you know, at the Marché, we're looking at all the films being made here, it seems like an absurd idea that this could ever happen. But I promise you, out in the world, outside of our bubble, things are changing pretty fast. So I'm going to ask you a question. Has any of you ever, in your life, had a profound cultural experience watching an opera or a play in a theater? If so, please raise your hand. Yes, most of you have indeed had a profound cultural experience watching an opera or a play in a theater. So have I, many, many times. I think that we agree that the medium of live stage performances of fictional stories has an enormous artistic potential, an enormous democratic potential, an enormous human potential. I think also that most of us do not go to the theater 4 times a year, and we certainly don't go to the theater 4 times a month. Let's look at another little medium, the circus. So a big media news that happened in 2017, in May, so a year ago exactly, is that Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey, the biggest big top circus in the world, closed. They did their final performance after 146 years. Now, big top circus used to be an enormously popular medium, an entertainment genre, an entertainment platform for the masses. The fact that Ringling Brothers closed down doesn't mean that circus as an art form is dead. In fact, you could argue that artistically, circus as an art form is doing better than ever. But it's also very, very clear that just as the cultural role of opera has changed in the last 400 years, the circus has changed in the last 200 years. These images of the Cirque du Soleil on Broadway, where of course people will pay $150 per ticket without blinking. And artistically it's outstanding, financially it's profitable. But this does not change the fact that circus as a broad entertainment category for the masses is rapidly becoming a thing of the past. So this is what we're talking about. This is the threat level that we're talking about when we're looking at what is happening to film, potentially happening to film. And this change, of course, would not happen in the next 5 years. This is something that can happen down the line if we mess this up. Film has had a very good run for over 120 years. But it would be criminally naive to assume that the rules of cultural change that have applied to every other medium and every other storytelling format in human history would not also apply to us. And in the last 5 years, we have seen a change in viewing behaviors that can and will never be rolled back. The movie theaters are doing very well, as we know, at least globally speaking, but their role and their function is clearly changing. Is diverging, so we have these places of bombastic experience as one type of cinematic experience, and then we have these places of social meeting and curation as another type of cinematic experience. Both of these are very powerful. I think both of these are incredibly valuable, and both of these are not the same thing as it used to be in the past. Film as a medium is also very strong. So even though there is more and better TV drama content than, of course, ever before, people still watch feature-length content quite a lot. And even though there seems to be some signals that it's diminishing a little bit, on average, certainly in the numbers that I see in the Nordic countries, we watch about as many films as we did before. And we watch a lot more television, so that time comes from somewhere else. We don't read newspapers anymore, for instance. That gives a lot of people 30 minutes a day, and we find that time somewhere else. The top 20 to 30 blockbuster titles gather enormous audiences, of course, and mostly they do it in that sort of wow effect storytelling side of this. And these films keep exhibitors in business, and they can certainly be incredibly important. When we released the report, we were a week out from Black Panther, and I'm very pleased to say that I was correct that it would make $1 billion. And even so, I could not imagine the impact this film would have, and also I love it. And in some way, it's like regardless of quality, right, it would have this impact. But it's also a really good movie. I am not dissing blockbusters, as you will hear later. In fact, I quite love them. But beyond this kind of big reach film, it's very clear that the audience is becoming more splintered. And this means that the box office of each title is lower, and it means that the cultural impact of each title is lower. So this diagram is from the excellent Stephen Fallows. You can follow his work for free on stephenfallows.com. That's where I stole the picture, and you should actually go and take a look at it. He also has a newsletter, which is really good. He's based in the UK and does industry analysis with a lot of focus on theatrical. So this diagram is changes in cinema admissions and film releases, using 2000 as a base, so it's 2000 to 2016. And you can see here how much do the cinema, how much do the number of titles released grow? That's the orange line, and how much do the admissions grow? And then there you have the UK and the US numbers. The number of titles released grows enormously, and box office in the US goes down a little bit. In the UK stays about the same. The rest of Europe is closer to UK. So. We had a big study in Norway last year looking at the impact of the digitalization of cinemas when it comes to how these admissions are distributed. And we see that the promise of digital theatrical, it has been borne through in the sense that more titles do get shown in more cinemas. That's great. So there is a longer tail. However, we also see, and that was, I mean, obvious, we should have predicted it, and many people did, I think, that of course the blockbusters opening in every town at the same time also means that they will take a bigger percentage. So the top 10, top 20 films take a bigger percentage of the overall share than they did before as well. So if digitalization of cinemas meant that every viewer can select and watch films that are meaningful for them, that would be fantastic. But unfortunately, so we see that that doesn't seem to be the case. Very many very good films do not find their audience. And plenty of viewers are choosing other media, not because they don't like films, but because they just cannot identify the titles that are relevant for them. And here we have a problem as an industry, being so conservative, and especially people like us who have a lot of power in this film paradigm. We are the last people in the world to look at other media and changes and things that are happening elsewhere. So I always talk about gaming, but I'm just going to mention like a little bit. If you are not aware of how big esports is, you need to do your homework. Every year I say something on this stage, like you need to do your homework on something. So just to have some idea of the penetration of this, esports of course is competitive computer gaming. So here we have a picture of an esports finals watched on location in a sports arena. We have a still of it being watched live on Twitch, and then the lower left-hand image is people sitting in a movie theater with their computers playing esports themselves. So does this compete with cinema? Not directly. Primarily, of course, esports is what you do instead of watching traditional physical sports or playing physical sports if you're younger today. But it also takes up television watching time, because the screen you're watching your Twitch streams on is the exact same screen in your living room that you're going to be watching Netflix on, or that you're going to be watching your TVOD film on. So this is not irrelevant for the film industry, especially not since esports is taking up cinema real estate. We can't separate these platforms anymore. This is just one example, but trust me, in every sector we see that the windows, just as the windows are converging, in many ways the platforms are also converging. The 2018 Child-Wise Monitor Report surveys 2,000 kids in schools across the UK, and less than 3 in 10 of these kids say that their viewing of film content is mostly on a traditional television set. And 15 and 16-year-olds view even less, view slightly less content than the younger teens. Just some statistics, you can look this up later. This is called the Child-Wise Monitor Report. So Snapchat is the second favorite website or app for kids. The number one is YouTube. Of course, 55% of the 7 to 16-year-olds use Snapchat, and that's up from 46% last year, and it seems to be growing. And this is also the leading platform for teenagers to stay in touch with each other, so they're on it all the time. More than half of UK kids and teens use Instagram, which is growing. WhatsApp is also growing significantly. And Twitter and Facebook drop in popularity. The drop continues. Only 4% of kids say they prefer Facebook. So if your idea of reaching out to younger demographics is that your content has a Facebook presence, you're so far off. And this isn't difficult, you just need to learn another platform, but I just want to remind you that this is something to keep in mind, that stay on top of the numbers because they are changing rapidly. So this is interesting. 42% of kids aged 9 to 16 access voice recognition gadgets at home, 36% for Siri, 20% for Cortana, 15% for Alexa, 7% for the Google Assistant, and 25% of children surveyed have VR equipment at home, and 10% of them, of those, have a PlayStation VR, 10% have Oculus Rift, 6% have HTC Vive. So those numbers are also growing rapidly. 5 years from now, a 14-year-old, one of these people, is going to be 19 years old and is going to be entering our sort of main demographics. And these kids today are speaking to robots and playing in VR. You guys, if we want to tell stories to these humans, it'd be great if we lived in the same reality as these humans. So if you're not doing any of these things, just go home and ask a child, and then remember that speaking to your particular child is not actually research. You have to find somebody who lives in another part of town. Yes. We can't market to kids because we're on the wrong platforms, and besides, I mean, I hate to say it, but advertising doesn't even work on these audiences. There's a lot of statistics about that. So yeah, obviously the viewing behaviors of our kids is changing so very rapidly within like the next 20-year period, of course. We're going to have to adjust to whatever their new norms are. But this isn't just about the viewing behaviors of the kids, it's about the structural changes in the entire landscape. So we as an industry are always incredibly focused on theatrical, but it's good to remember that when you look at the total lifetime of a feature film, somewhere around a quarter or a third of its revenue will be from television, and those are UK numbers. And again, let's remember that those percentages are relative. So when the DVD income collapsed, the television percentage goes up and the theatrical percentage goes up, even though the absolute numbers don't necessarily go up. But relatively speaking, broadcast is becoming more important to us, and of course theatrical's stranglehold on this industry becomes even stronger for that reason. The television income is interesting because television is changing too, and it's happening really fast. 5 years from now, almost all television will essentially be some kind of streaming, and also like, technically that will happen. But they are basically transforming into brands and services, what we are thinking about as networks today. And they are much ahead of the curve compared to the film industry because they're hit so much harder by the streaming services. They have been forced to change, and we have been cushioned a little bit by this coincidental effect that most of our income actually comes from the theatrical window, which has in some ways, relatively speaking, benefited. And we see that scheduling films and linear broadcasting is increasingly difficult. So numbers for feature-length films on television are great for filmmakers. You know, you compare your especially if you're making an art house film or documentary, you look at what you made in the cinema in Sweden, where maybe 4,000 people bought a ticket, or maybe if you did really well, 20,000 people, and then you look at broadcasting and you're like, well, wow, 80,000 or 100,000 people watched my film, that's great. Yeah, but for the broadcaster, those numbers are not great. So they resist. They don't want to schedule feature-length content on television anymore. And they certainly don't want to do it in linear, and they don't want to pay the kind of money they once did. So that's another window that is essentially disappearing. Now, as they are transforming into catch-up services or library services, some of them will need the film content anyway. But I think we should also expect the money to go down. Yes. Since I come from a Nordic country, there's a law that says that we have to mention this Norwegian TV drama called Skam every time we give a talk. So I was speaking to Ivar Köhn for this report. He's the head of drama at the Norwegian podcaster in Marché. And he says now the online player is what they program for. They know that they have a linear audience. It's old people, like really old people. So of course they program a broadcast channel for them. But online is where their focus is. That's their actual channel now. That's their service. And it's worth thinking about that Skam was not one hit. It had 4 entirely different hits on different viewing patterns. It had its online, sort of blog-based sharing. It had its online player, so the NRK Play service. There was the broadcast window, and there was the piracy window, which was enormous as well, because this became, of course, an international hit. And now there's been a remake has just started on Facebook Watch. I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know if it's any good. And I'm not going to talk so much about television, but you can read more in the report about some of the things that are happening there, and about how these these channels are transforming more into content brands. But I think it's useful, probably, I think for you, especially if you're a producer, to think about linear television and streamed television, including the online services of, for instance, the podcasters in Europe, as completely different mediums, or essentially different mediums at this point. And if your film has reached in television, that's fantastic, but for most of us, that should probably be an afterthought. Film is programmed-less, film is commissioned-less by TV, and when it is, the money is lower. And of course, the availability of exclusive quality content in the TV window, so including, for instance, the over-the-top services like HBO or in Europe or Netflix, it has created this other window, a parallel window, and that means that a lot of natural laws, historical laws, preferences of film and TV are changing, and it's not as clear anymore even what is a film. And that's, of course, why we see a lot of television content at festivals. But when you're looking at the star power in something like Big Little Lies, and you're thinking about, I mean, films are so long now, so Big Little Lies is like 2.5 movies long. And most people will probably watch it over just 2 nights at home, maybe 3. So is that a film? Or is it, and what is the thing you're not watching? Is the thing you're not watching some other additional episodes of a TV drama, or is it another feature film that you're competing with, that it's competing with in your household? But there are also other laws that are being challenged in very interesting ways. So the relative irrelevance of short film and the sort of long short, which we in Swedish call novellfilm, the short story film, that's also changing. We all pretended, we have historically pretended that short film is very important and that we care very much who wins the awards and so on. But of course we all know that actually we have treated as an industry short film as a sort of training ground for people to make real movies, aka feature films. That might not be true anymore. Like finally there are windows and there are ways of connecting to an audience where short film might actually become much more relevant than feature-length film. And that, I would say, is a surprising twist at this point in the history of this medium. And of course we also increasingly see feature films that are not intended to be seen in cinemas, like most of Netflix is, or that will literally not be able to have a traditional release. We make these movies, we want these movies to be shown in cinemas, but there is just no space in the cinemas. We're still operating on 2016 numbers. I'm looking here at the report that you all got in your Marché bag, which very few people read. I think you should. Let's see here, Europe, 2016. In Europe we made 2,123 feature-length films in 2016. It seems that the preliminary numbers for last year seem that maybe it's finally turned down a little bit, but over 2,000 movies a year is a little bit more than we can screen in our cinemas. So some of those are only going to be seen on the small screen, and that's fine. That doesn't mean that they are not movies. So we need to think about, again, what these formats actually mean. And if windows are being open or broken, we might also be closing the book on territories. I was surprised, but almost everyone we have spoken to agree that even though the European digital single market currently protects the principles of territoriality in the long term, and that long term might be a lot shorter than you think, it's probably not feasible because consumers just do not understand it. It's fundamentally territories are fundamentally in conflict with how these technologies work and how the releases today work. Now, the attention of a global audience can clearly be divided and monetized in different ways, and again, in the next hour, we're probably going to talk more about that in the blockchain session. But the division, like the borders, are unlikely to be nation states. It's much more reasonable to assume that it's going to be things like language areas or target audiences, interest groups, platforms, and so on. And this changes the function of sales and distribution entirely. And of course, we're already seeing this tendency because a lot of middlemen of every kind are increasingly investing in production to lower their risk through leveraging their understanding of the market, right? And that's actually a good development. And this also relates to changes in the corporate structures when it comes to content making and circulation. So the consolidation tendency that we're seeing is connected to this as well. Yeah. Now, if there are Americans here, you're going to be surprised, but I need to speak honestly among Europeans. So from a European perspective, we have always viewed the Hollywood majors in particular as somewhat godlike in their ability to make and attract European audiences with both masterful cinema on the one hand and really good-looking trash on the other hand. And we always speak of them as this sort of unfathomable gods. I realized I had 6 logos there. I suppose it should be 5 logos now. And very similarly, we have this narrative where we talk about Netflix in Europe as some kind of mythical monster that eats viewers. And it lures the audiences into this endless labyrinth of content, which is clearly unfairly using excellent quality storytelling. And that seems like cheating to us. We're not sure why, but it doesn't seem right that somebody makes stuff that people want to see and then they get to retain our audiences. And I think this is quite strange, because individually, of course, at the end of our workday on our shoot or editing your film or whatever, you're going to go home and watch Netflix just like everybody else, and still we are very astonished and a little bit hurt at this unfairness. If we take something like the US SWAT services alone, those are estimated to spend $20 billion US, that is $20 billion US on content this year. That's up from 15 last year. So that's pretty big. The Hollywood majors, also pretty damn big. If you list the global top 50 audiovisual companies, all categories of audiovisual companies, the 6 Hollywood majors between them represent 37% of the revenue. It's no joke. Like, these have been a big historical enemy of ours, competitor of ours. Now, difficult though it may be to comprehend, don't panic, you don't need to read this is just an illustration. Difficult though it may be to comprehend, these gods and monsters are no longer the biggest players around. As I said, again, Netflix, pretty big. Hollywood majors, pretty big. But Apple, Alphabet, which includes Google and therefore YouTube, Microsoft, which includes Xbox, Amazon and Facebook, are 5 of the world's 8 biggest companies in any category by market capitalization. 5 of the world's 8 biggest companies in any category by market cap, which measures stock worth, not cash at hand, not their revenue, not the price for buying the company on the market, not the total value of their assets, but it's a decent shorthand. This is big. These guys are big. And the competition here is not for sales or for box office dollars, it's for audience attention. And this means that relevance is suddenly going to have to be what we're competing about. So what do I mean by that? Actually, I'm going to return to that in just a little while. I'm just going to say this. So there was actually some of these numbers are a little bit inflated because there was this big surge in the market at the beginning of the year when we released the report. But even so, they're still massive. But there was a month in January when Jeff Bezos, one of the founders of Amazon, personally made $20 billion. Personally, in worth. He didn't get the cash right, but his worth increased $20 billion. So, to put that in proportion, Disney buying the Fox assets, does anybody remember that number? How much did it cost for Disney to buy the Fox assets? $52 billion, yes. So Jeff Bezos personally could have bought Fox for the money he made in 6 weeks. That's messed up. Facebook and Google, between them, these 2 companies, Facebook and Google between them, they account for 61% of all online ad revenue in the world. This translates to about a quarter of all advertising revenue in the world on these 2 companies that are your competitors now. And a lot of this money is just sitting around. That's revenue, like that's money that they have, it's just sitting around waiting to be spent. And Apple's App Store, where you buy your apps if you have an iPhone, it's 10 years old this year, and it is projected to surpass the global movie industry in revenue this year. And that's just the App Store. This is for a sense of proportion. They have a lot of money. And they sell other things than content, and for this reason, they cannot be outspent. For these operators in this marketplace, for these of our competitors, the profitability of one single piece of content is basically entirely irrelevant. Because they're not using a film to make money on a film. They're using it to sell something else entirely. iPhones, gaming systems, books, groceries. So this is a picture. Now if you're an Amazon Prime member, which of course you need to be to watch Transparent and many of your other favorite shows in the US, It gives you free delivery in many urban areas or some urban areas in the United States of Whole Foods groceries within 2 hours for free. So you don't have to go to the grocery store because you're a Prime member because you want to watch this content, so they're just going to bring the food home for you. That's the business model. That's what they're selling. They're not selling these TV shows, so they can cost anything. And what's Disney's business model? That's an interesting question, I think. I'm not even sure. But arguably, Disney's in the business of generational myth building. Disney's in the business not of releasing a film and then making money on that film. They like that. They don't like it when they fail. And box office, is important. But basically, they want to own your emotions. They want to own your kids' attention, and they want to own the box office, and they do, between Marvel, Pixar, Star Wars, and all of the Disney legacy properties as well. So, in 2016, industry overall earnings for film shrank about 19%, but of the money actually made, Disney alone took home like 61%. And again, this is a small player compared to Disney Channel. So, yeah, that's worrying, I suppose. But in a way, it's also not very worrying, because we can outspend them, but that's also always been true. We also couldn't outspend the Hollywood. We, the European industry, could not outspend the Hollywood majors either. And that's fine. We compete with different things. We compete with quality, and we compete with storytelling, and we compete with narrative innovation and aesthetic innovation, and we compete with relevance. And that becomes even more important now. So, the clear tendency is that windows, platforms, territories, and formats, they are all converging. Audiovisual works are being used to sell many other things than the work itself. Of course, most primarily, and that's been true for a long time, audience attention in the home, but also other things. And the cultural role and the culture and the content as well, of course, of what's happening in movie theaters is changing. Then this means that the revenue streams will not be the same as before. They will never again be the same as before. And if the revenue streams are not the same, then film funding is not going to work the way it has up until today. And if you're trying to compete, some films will be made and funded in a way that's very similar to the way that we had for the last 20 or 50 years. But not all. And if you're not already established, and if you're not already in that world and very in that pipeline, if you don't already have a theatrical audience, it's possible that you're never going to get it. And that's totally fine, because the audience is somewhere else anyway. So when you make something, you have to figure out for whom is this relevant? Who is the audience for this thing? Is this thing that I'm making a movie? Because it might be something else, whatever movie means. Where is that attention? And then work backwards from there. How do we monetize that attention? How do we get the promise of that monetized attention and turn it into funding for this thing that we want to make? This is a big new challenge for producers as well, of course, inevitably. So, previously we used to make a lot of money in theatrical and a little money in each following window. And now we have to place each piece of content where the exact right audience can find it, and we must allure the audience and educate the audience to want the thing if it's challenging, and we must monetize the attention differently depending on where it is. And we have to ask ourselves an existential question, and where better to ask it than here at Cannes. Where should film fit in this landscape? Because there is a tension between broad audiences and artistic experimentation. But I don't think there is a conflict at all, no tension between quality and popularity. Like many big TV shows, in fact, have demonstrated. A lot of those TV shows are amazing. They are storytelling and filmmaking of a very, very high quality. And the audiences love them. So that's not the problem. If storytelling of that quality doesn't work in theatrical, then maybe, again, it's not theaters where we should be. And that is heartbreaking to me as a cineast. But certainly, like, the long, wide release is probably not realistic for most of the kinds of films that I want to see. And I think, actually, that even very experimental content has a completely different market potential now. I think that it's going to grow, because we can actually find the people who like that kind of thing on the day when we don't have to rely on reaching them on a day when it's possible for them to leave their home and go to a movie theater. We can target everyone, all our releases, based on audience taste, and of course that includes now technically, relatively trivially, individual targeting for individual taste. historical cultural hierarchies survive for much longer than audience popularity for a medium does. And these can be protected. And there is a choice that we're making in Europe now, and I also am on the board of the Swedish Film Institute, and I work with some other film institutes as well, so I am personally also very invested in this. We could make a choice now to use public money to protect the current format and the current status of feature film, as we have done with opera. Opera remains in its current form because we have decided in Europe that it's worth protecting in the way that it is, and we're just like pumping public funds into keeping that so. But that also means that it's going to kind of turn into a museum, and we cannot ever force an art form to stay relevant to a wide audience. And then again, I say this as a classically trained singer, I love opera, but I would want film to be a little bit broader than that. I don't see, and neither do the experts in our report, why the hell we should roll over and say that it's done. Because people love film. And then back to where we were at the beginning. At the beginning and the end of the value chain, everybody's doing fantastic. Like, we're making better films and better TV drama than ever before, in massive amounts. Also, we're making a lot of shit, but like in absolute numbers, the stuff that's great, there's just so much of it, and it's fantastic. And over here, we have audiences who want to use that, to want to see it and participate in it and consume it, and they do more than ever before. It's everything in the middle that is in flux. People love film. People love cinematic storytelling. They love stories that end, by the way. People love going to the cinema as well. And even teen audiences, and I reference a study in the report about this, they particularly mention what an enormous relief it is to be immersed when you're in the movie theater, when you're watching the actual film, to be immersed in the story, to be focused, and to put your cell phone away. They love that. Even young audiences love that. So the power of that is still very powerful. Then, of course, what they want around it in the movie theater, they want a lot of social things when you're not watching the movie. And there, I think, there's a whole chapter on what theatrical should be doing, which, if you're in that, you should read and get in touch if you have more questions. Yeah. Some people would argue that Hollywood is in a creative crisis. And that's, of course, great news for us at a place like this festival, where we love films that are not like this film. That said, incredibly complicated Hollywood movies like Inception or Arrival, like intellectually very challenging films, they do incredibly well with audiences. And profitable small genre films like Get Out are supremely intelligent in entertainment. And in the last years, we have seen mid-budget films struggling to find their audiences, especially in theatrical, but we also see that very good art house films do overperform, even in the US market. So again, it doesn't mean that people don't want the things, it's just that connecting the content with the viewers that somehow seems to be a problem. And of course, part of the problem is, and I have some numbers about blockbuster production in the report as well, part of the problem is the screens are filled with The Mummy, or, yeah, this is The Mummy, yeah. When they maybe should be showing Moonlight. Yes. So I've already mentioned that other formats than feature length have new opportunities in this new environment. And another fun trend that we do write about that could have enormous potential is the strategic goal of the European blockbuster, which I'm very invested in personally, because I love big entertainment movies, and I'm a massive superhero fan, and I'm like a genre dork as well. So many American blockbuster films are already made here in Europe. So many American blockbuster films are made by Europeans who go to America to be able to work on that kind of film. Of course, there is no reason why we couldn't make them here. We could make locally specific stories with international potential, just as we have seen that we can do in television. We already know that it's possible to fund this kind of movie outside the normal channels, and we know that they can look absolutely amazing. Agreed, they don't have to be shit, like the script also needs to be there, and we're not quite there yet. But I do want to say that this is a real opportunity. I think that this is something that we should think about. If we have the skill set, why say that we couldn't ever make the quality blockbusters in Europe? Of course we can. Of course we can. And I mean, the reason is that if you're old, you're sighing now and you're saying, oh, we know what that is. That is Euro cutting. And that is the devil's film. Yes, that is true. But that's, historically, we haven't been great at this. But we're a lot better now. And if you're speaking to people who are like 30 or under in this industry, they are already working in a global labor market, where innovation in this field can come from Africa or Estonia just as easily as it comes from Silicon Valley. And of course, where television content travels across borders very freely. Yeah, this is a super specific Swedish picture. I should have changed it. I realized this is Ronja the Robber's Daughter. That would be my favorite, like #1 choice for European, Northern European blockbuster adventure film. What we're going to have to compete with again is relevance, not just quality, not just production value. Whether big or small, regardless of platform, your content will be measured first and foremost on relevance, and that's the thing where you connect to the audience. You can't make shit, that's not going to work. Everything has to be good. But now we're talking about how to compete with the things that are objectively speaking good. And finally, I would like to say a few words about representation. We wrote more about it in last year's report, which you can find online, when we predicted that progress in particular gender equality in the industry is rapid and inevitable, and that of course has accelerated in the last year. The starting situation is so grim that I would be very astonished if we actually have 50-50 by 2020, but that's a good goal to work towards. But that's, of course, not the only kind of representation that is relevant. So I'm going to recap once again like what I've said so far. This is a thrilling moment of risk, but also of opportunity. Cinemas are doing well, their cultural role is shifting, and the majority of films are consumed in the home. And this has been true for decades. But at least, well, for all of my life, the majority of films that people see, they see in the home. That's certainly been true at least since the 80s, right? So it's not a massive shift from the consumer perspective, it's no shift at all. But even for us, maybe it shouldn't be such a massive shift to think about where is the audience and how do we speak to the audience where they are. So all of the later windows are changing, they're changing technologically, they're more importantly changing in audience behavior. And to remain relevant and to monetize audience attention in the value chain and to reach especially the younger audiences who do not respond to advertising, I repeat, we have to shift our attitudes, and we have to shift, of course, our business models. And that has to happen now. Because as Klaus Ladegaard says, maybe we only have 5-6 years, maybe we only have 2 years to start to change the way we're thinking and the way we're working. And European filmmaking is relying on a lot of really slow-moving structures because a lot of our funds are being controlled through legislation that is being controlled through elections. So actually, it's probably not going to be the national film funds that are going to be the drivers of change here. We see some regional film funds doing very excellent work, but you guys, you will have to do the work. Like we're at the funds, we're working as fast as we can to start thinking in new ways, but it's very hard, and many of us are bound by our bylaws to not support anything that doesn't fit the old system, for instance. So here really the innovation needs to come proactively from the industry. And gender equality connects to this, and all of the other kinds of representation, mainly minority representations, women, as you know, are not a minority, all of these representational issues connect directly to the business issues, because we know from research in a lot of other industries that when leadership is homogeneous, the industry does not have a broad understanding of the world, and especially not of changes in the world. This is a very conservative business in general, film is, and in Europe in particular, almost all of our decision makers, both on the production side and on the funding side, are old white people with very arrogant attitudes towards any media that is not film, and they have a constitutional inability to get excited about innovation if that innovation does not involve a projector. So this is incredibly unlikely to change in the next 5 years. Like 10 years from now, all of those people, most of those people will be retired, but right now they're just sitting there. So again, like that's what we're working against here. Everybody who is not one of those people, you need to figure out which guy, which old white guy, is the one who will listen, and that's the people we're going to be working with. Everybody is needed to figure this out. In this room, during this week, I have been listening to a lot of sessions on topics that we can broadly organize as VR, blockchain, and true global. And I will say a few words about this. Are any of these the answer to the problems that I have been speaking about? No, probably not. VR, super exciting, as we know. The content is mostly terrible. Still, even the best content is basically tech and advertising the tech. But we're getting there, and it's developing very, very fast, and it would have been very unfair to say of cinema in 1895 to look at it and go like in 1900 and go, yeah, I don't see potential here. Like clearly VR has enormous, enormous potential financially and artistically, but it's going to be its own medium. It's not going to solve problems for the film industry, apart from maybe providing work opportunities for the people who should not be making feature films anymore in Europe because we can't make as many as we're doing right now. So that's good. There's also a challenge, though, that a lot of people in VR on the panels that I've been hearing this week are saying, yeah, we're seeing a tendency where like theatrical isn't doing well for film, so maybe we could take like 5% of the screen real estate in cinemas in the world and to transform those into VR cinemas, which might be a really good idea for the exhibition sector, by the way, and very good for the penetration of VR in the world, but it's not great for the rest of us, because then we have even fewer screens to show our content on. Then we have this idea that innovation can come from anywhere. That is part of the answer if we're humble and interested in in the kinds of innovation that are made in surprising places, and understand that our surprise is probably like racist or historically inflected. And then we have blockchain, which is a technology, and now it's a buzzword that we're gluing on to all kinds of things. But currently there is a lot of energy in a lot of the companies and a lot of the innovations around blockchain that are actually being forced to engage with exactly the kinds of structural challenges and the funding questions and the circulation questions that I've been talking about. So even though it's a lot of the startups that are operating in the blockchain space don't necessarily even need, certainly I don't think cryptocurrency, they could just do it with ordinary money, but they wouldn't necessarily even need the blockchain technology to do what they want to do. But whatever, if they want that as like leverage, that's fantastic, and that's at least something that can drive some change. In the blockchain spaces right now, we have a lot of people who are thinking about how we could take all of these boxes that make up the value chain and make up the production and circulation landscape of cinema and the funding landscape, and move those boxes around into some new order that might actually work for us in the industry as well as it does for the audiences right now, or better even. So we're going to talk more about blockchain in 10 minutes from now, but I think we should breathe and go get water and do all of those things. Here's our contact information. The most important is that if you go to Göteborg Film Festival, göteborgfilmfestival.se/Nostradamus, you can download all of our reports for free and email them to all of your colleagues, as you should. I meet wise people here who say, I read it, then I sent it to everyone on my board, and that makes me feel very good. And my contact information is there. Sia, could you just stand up and wave? Sia is the head of the Nordic film market, and if you want to talk more about the Nordic film market, you should, or the Göteborg Festival, you should talk to Sia, and she also has to, if you want to make some kind of strategic partnership with us, talk to her. I only think that's my job. Okay. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back with a really badass panel talking about how blockchain can change sales distribution and funding, and I will now say thank you.